focused on DeSantis in Iowa. We're no longer focused on him. It's Trump in New Hampshire and Trump in South Carolina.
I'm leaning towards Donald Trump. I'm not crazy about him as a person. Not looking for a husband or a friend, though.
Avoiding a shutdown is very good news for the country, for our veterans, for parents and children.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We are 5 days out from the New Hampshire Republican primary, and GOP candidates are now trading barbs on the campaign trail. Former President Donald Trump and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley have been sharply criticizing each other as the second contest in the Republican nomination process nears. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis turning his sights to South Carolina, where he's now moving a majority of his campaign staff. CBS News political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now from Manchester, New Hampshire, home of my favorite, the Red Arrow Diner. Caitlin, great to have you back reporting for us on the campaign trail. What are voters telling you about the candidates today?
Hey, Bob, great to be with you. And we were just at the Red Arrow earlier this week. All is well here in New Hampshire. It's shaping up to be a competitive race between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. And the voters really at the center of this primary are Republicans and those who are undeclared or independent voters who can cast their ballots in this primary. We sat down with a group of those voters to see what's at stake for them in this election. And a lot of them weren't too happy with their options. Just by a show of hands, how many of you are planning to vote in the primary next week? And then another show of hands, how many of you are excited about your choices this time around? No one. Okay. Who are you leaning towards?
I'm leaning towards Donald Trump.
Okay, and why?
Full disclosure, I'm not crazy about him as a person. Not looking for a husband or a friend, though. Looking for somebody who's going to improve the quality of a majority of Americans' lives financially. I also think that sometimes the nicest person for the job isn't the best person for the job.
So his personality or behavior, you're kind of looking past that?
I am.
I'm going to be supporting Nikki Haley. I find it very hard personally myself to vote for president for anybody that wasn't a governor. So that's one of my main criteria. And with her experience as the ambassador to the UN, I think gives her a head and shoulders above others that are in the race as far as foreign policies.
I'm not per se happy about any specific candidate. I think they all have their negatives.
You're persuadable.
Yeah, I'm pretty open. I think the only person I would not actually vote for is Trump because he is in a lot of criminal implications that might affect his ability to be a good president for the United States.
I think the president is a leader politically, internationally, and morally. And I think Trump's morals, what he's done, has been horrible. I want my grandkids to look up to the president. So I'm undeclared. And oftentimes I do vote Democrat, but this time I'm going to be voting a Republican primary. And I think DeSantis is sort of another Trump in just different clothes. So I'll be supporting Haley.
So you are voting in the Republican primary
Yes.
to try and stop Trump from being the nominee.
Exactly.
And how about you?
I cast a vote for the same reason you toss a penny in a fountain to make a wish. I know that when you do cast a vote, I look at it as more of like an exercise of free speech. In the end, once they get in the office, they all govern the same. There's very little difference.
So let's talk about Trump for a little bit, just because New Hampshire is a place that kind of gave Trump his start. If you think about it, in 2016, he won the primary. He's here again. He's leading in all of the polls. What is it about New Hampshire that you think is favorable to him at one point?
If you go back to even to the last time he ran, there was two things that I said back then is one, you never underestimate the stupidity of the American voter. And we all thought Donald Trump would just phase out. However, he was in the news cycle so much, so often, every day, his popularity grew. And now we have a candidate we can't get rid of.
I see Trump as a populist. So he's obviously only going to say and do things that are going to get him elected. Granted, he's definitely not a perfect person. He's, but what politician is a perfect person?
I mean, Debbie, that's kind of what you were saying, right? You're not looking for the perfect.
I just want to reiterate that don't underestimate my intelligence. I'm not a stupid person. I'm actually quite well educated. I am voting for Donald Trump. because he's the only one that I think is going to change the complete mess we have in Washington right now. He's an outsider, and the simple fact that he's hated and there is so much pressure being put on him legally, I believe it's all politically motivated.
It's so interesting because he is referred to as an outsider.
Absolutely.
But he was president for 4 years, but you still consider him to be an outsider.
Washington is a swamp.
Going into this election, did you consider any of the other candidates?
I really liked the way Ron DeSantis handled COVID in Florida. I love his policies that he's put in place with the education and the transgender stuff that he's put in place. I would have liked to have seen him, but he just doesn't have the numbers. So he would have been my second choice. Nikki Haley seems like a lovely lady. I just do not think she has the strength, the fortitude to resist, I think, what happens in Washington behind closed doors.
DeSantis is not campaigning here as heavily. If he were to drop out of the race, would that impact how you're thinking?
It wouldn't change my vote, but the political calculation here is if DeSantis leaves, a lot of those voters will go vote for Trump.
And Bruce, you are supporting Nikki Haley. Do you agree with that?
We know what 4 years of Trump is. Some people think it was good. Some people, like me, think it was a horror show. I fear for our country. I fear for our democracy. Nikki Haley, I'm not an enthusiastic supporter of necessarily. It's more like who's left standing that I can vote for.
Let's talk about immigration. Is it a concern for you all?
I don't think either party has come up with a good immigration policy.
Over the course of Biden's presidency, the numbers are staggering. No one wants to hear about women and children escaping, evil regimes. No one wants to hear about drownings in the Rio Grande. It's very emotionally compelling. It is not fiscally feasible. We have people in our own country that need help, and we're not helping them.
Are you all thinking about foreign policy?
Yes.
I think it comes to the forefront before election every time.
And you're someone who served.
Yes.
How does your service kind of inform how you're thinking about this?
I was able to see the fraud, waste, and abuse from the inside.
For me, it's the lesser of two evils when it comes to Ukraine. Send them what they need, as long as it's not an American soldier.
But let's kind of take a step back and kind of tell me about how you feel about the direction of the country right now in a word or two.
I think we're treading water.
I think we've lost our moral compass. I think we're upside down.
It's a mess, like economically. Like I could buy a bottle of juice, for example, or like a soda for like $1.50 maybe. You could go in there now and it's $3.50.
Have any of you had to kind of change your behavior or your spending habits because of the economy?
Yeah. I don't go out to eat as much.
I have a budget at the grocery store now.
Sure.
I used to just be like, oh, make a list, go to the grocery store, get what we need. Now it's like, oh, if we go over this much, then we got to take some stuff off of it because, we don't have as much money as we used to. It doesn't buy as much as we used to be able to buy.
What do you think it means to be an American?
People,
That's
we
right.
speak our mind, we can vote, that's really the essence of being an American.
That's the genesis of what government should be, is the organization of people to live peacefully and prosperly.
I would only add to that, because I agree with both, I would only add that we need to continue to be able to have the freedoms to say and express ourselves.
I just think that there's a certain sense of like democracy and ability to have conversations like we're doing now. And I think that's a key point in being an American.
I think the spirit is also, we've lost some of the spirit of, we can disagree like crazy, and we can go round and round and round like crazy, but you can walk out the door across the street and have a beer and be friends.
Sure.
We've lost that in our government, and what we're doing here is a step in the right direction.
Maybe you all can have a beer here.
I think we're gonna.
So as you can see, this was kind of a wide-ranging conversation, but one theme here was that these voters are all planning on showing up on Tuesday to cast their ballots, thinking that this is a very important race to participate in. And they all, at the end of that conversation, agreed that conversations like that, sitting down together, talking things through, being civil, is something that they all wanted to see a little more of. Bob.
Caitlin, always intriguing and interesting to hear the voices of voters. But before we go, what's your assessment as a reporter on the ground, talking to voters, talking to the campaigns, about Haley's path to victory at this point, if any?
Yeah, Bob, that is really the question of this primary. Can she make it competitive? She wanted this to be a two-person race between herself and Donald Trump. She has that now, with DeSantis essentially all but ceding New Hampshire to those two, focusing instead on South Carolina. But it's still a very uphill climb for Haley here. Even those supporting her, like Governor Chris Sununu, have been managing expectations. I actually spoke with him earlier today, and he said, look, they wanted to get this to a two-person race. He believes that she at least can come in second, but there is still a lot of work to do. So she's really barnstorming the state today, had 3 events, has a town hall later tonight. She's really hoping to turn out independent voters that we talk to who say that they don't really like Donald Trump and want to move on. The question is, are there enough of them, and can she present a viable path forward? We talked to Donald Trump supporters here, and they're even more invigorated, and the Trump campaign believes that if they can have a big win here in New Hampshire, they can lock this nomination up pretty early.
We shall see. My colleague Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you. A measure to prevent a government shutdown is on its way to the president's desk. We take you live up to Capitol Hill pretty soon for the latest. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Congress has passed a bill that would prevent a partial government shutdown. It now heads to President Biden's desk. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now. Nicole, great to see you. How did this get through both the House and the Senate?
Well, it is a bit of a miracle, Bob. I mean, look, there was a lot of angst at the beginning of this week and even the beginning of this month as to whether or not Congress would be able to avert a shutdown. But we really saw a significant breakthrough first when we saw congressional leaders reach that agreement over top-line spending that guides the overall appropriations process a couple of weeks ago. And then at the beginning of this week, of course, we saw that agreement between Speaker Johnson and Leader Schumer and the other congressional leaders to move forward with, again, keeping this laddered or staggered approach to extend government funding to March 1st and March 8th, basically sliding that timetable because, as you know, government funding was due to run out at the end of this week, January 19th, and then again on February 2nd for other federal agencies. So we're basically just sliding the scale for about a month to 6 weeks. And the hope is that, lawmakers in both chambers can get these appropriations bills that they've been working on for many months now, get those over the finish line so that they don't have to do another CR in the future.
It wasn't unanimous, so who were the strongest objectors?
Yeah, well, really, a lot of this was coming from the House Freedom Caucus, at least over on the House side. I mean, we saw that this CR passed overwhelmingly, but interestingly, among Republicans, they were nearly split right down the middle. I believe it was 107 to 106 in terms of those in favor and those opposing. And we did see this last-minute effort on the part of some House Freedom Caucus members who tried to get Speaker Johnson to amend this CR by including a border provision, a border amendment to it. As you know, that continues to be a big wedge issue with respect to this national security supplemental, which is separate in terms of dealing with a lot of foreign aid assistance. That's why congressional leaders were at the White House earlier this week. But again, Republicans have made clear that they really want to see some action on the border. So there was this late push to try to get that border amendment attached. In the end, Speaker Johnson didn't acquiesce, and so they did just vote on a clean up or down vote. But most of those opposing being the ones who didn't really support the Speaker moving forward with this CR.
Speaking of the Speaker, Speaker Johnson, what's the status of his job, especially as some House Republicans voice their frustration about how he's handled all of this?
Well, he is facing increased threats from members who are considering invoking this motion to vacate. Most recently, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia suggested that she may invoke that procedural tool, which is the same tool that we saw was used to oust former Speaker Kevin McCarthy last fall. She says that she's willing to do that if the Speaker ultimately ends up moving forward with Ukraine aid, which again is tied into this national security supplemental that the White House really wants Congress to approve right away. Of course, it includes funding for Israel, humanitarian assistance for Gaza, aid to the Indo-Pacific, and some border funding. But as you know, Bob, there have been a number of starts and stops as far as those border negotiations are concerned. And so, the hope is that with this White House meeting this week, it could move the ball forward. But ultimately, if it does move forward again, that could potentially jeopardize Speaker Johnson's job. He has made clear that he's not really concerned with those threats right now, that he has a job to do. And at the moment, he seems to be playing down those threats.
And Nicole, very quickly, any new reporting on the foreign aid negotiations?
Well, again, following that White House meeting on Wednesday, it appears that there is some momentum to move forward with this supplemental package. Leader McConnell indicated the Senate could vote on this as soon as next week. And Leader Schumer also said that he believes the negotiators are extremely close on a deal. They're just trying to iron out a few more differences. So whether or not that package comes to the floor again remains to be seen if it happens next week, but that certainly is the hope among some lawmakers. The bigger question is when and if it does, what will happen to it in the House?
Nicole Killian on top of everything on Capitol Hill. We really appreciate your reporting. Coming up next, House Minority Whip Congresswoman Katherine Clark joins us. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. President Biden is planning a big push to highlight abortion access as part of his re-election campaign. The plan includes a series of ad buys and events across the country. The first rally is scheduled for next week, marking 51 years since the Supreme Court's landmark Roe v. Wade ruling. As you know, that decision has been since overturned, upending American politics. Democratic Congresswoman Katherine Clark joins us now. She's also the House Minority Whip. Congresswoman, we really appreciate you taking the time. What's your assessment of the Biden campaign's decision to move in this direction on abortion rights, really bringing it to the fore of the 2024 campaign?
I applaud this decision by the Biden campaign because it reflects the concerns of the American people. What we have seen as I travel the country in red states, blue states, purple states, and we've certainly seen in every single state when reproductive freedom has been on the ballot, the American people understand what is at stake. And they are turning out to vote to be able to make this most fundamental decision with their own decision, with their family, with their doctor, and with their faith. And the stories that we have heard of the denial of fundamental medical care in states that have bans are absolutely terrifying. So this is the critical issue moving forward into 24 in how we are going to define freedom for Americans as we go into this critical election.
Congresswoman, when you think about the issue of the economy, the issue of abortion rights, the issue of democracy, and January 6th, which President Biden has discussed at length in recent weeks, how do you weigh them as a leader for House Democrats in terms of what should be put first when messaging to voters, when putting ads together? Are they all kind of the same, worth the same politically in terms of the message, or do you see them as a bit different depending on the part of the country?
No, they're so tied, and it speaks to every part of the country, and it speaks to whether you're living in rural America, suburban America, or in our urban cities. Because here's the thing. We know that democracy is on the ballot in 24. We have heard what Donald Trump has said his plans are for our country. We have to believe him. And he is planning to strip our democracy, continue to undermine secure elections, and continue to narrow the vote. And at the same time, he has taken away reproductive freedom. And when you will take away that decision from American women, from American families, there is no line of government intrusion that they won't cross. And this has to do with the economic issues as well. And the fact that just today in Congress, when we were on the verge yet again of another Republican shutdown, what did they choose to prioritize? 2 anti-abortion bills. Why aren't they working with Democrats to lower costs like we did around the cost of insulin, capping it at $35 a month for our seniors without a single Republican vote? Why aren't they coming together and addressing gun violence with us while we have that bill pending in front of them today? Why aren't they working on the issues that the American people are concerned about? As I travel, I hear about reproductive freedom. I hear about the high costs of housing, the high costs of groceries and rent. These are the issues that the American people sent us here to fight for them. And the vision that Donald Trump and the House GOP has is totally leaving those concerns out of their agenda.
And there's a real standoff remaining, even though the House has averted a partial government shutdown. A real standoff remains on Capitol Hill between House Republicans and House Democrats over the issue of the border. How do you believe that could be resolved, if at all, in the coming weeks?
It could be resolved, and it could have been resolved if Republicans were serious about coming to solutions. Here's what we know. We know that we have a true security issue at the border, that we have inhumane conditions for migrants coming to that border. We have a system that is not working. But at each time that we have seen the Republicans evaluate a proposal, they say no. I want to go back to the Farm Workers Modernization Act because it is such a classic example of what I mean. That was a bill that was brought together by Big Ag, by the Farm Workers Union, by advocates with many different issues that came together to say this could create a pathway to citizenship and also have the farm workers' needs met and help us lower grocery costs. A win-win-win. Republicans rejected it. That's same with the Dreamers bill. And now what we're looking at is a president who has put forward many proposals on ways that we can strengthen security at the border. Just last year, hundreds of millions into technology to make sure that we are stopping fentanyl that we know is coming directly through our ports. How many Republican votes did that have? 0. So let's get serious about addressing an immigration system that is not working for anybody, instead of using it as just political fodder and also just, being inhumane in the way they are describing immigrants and putting our national security at risk, holding up aid to Ukraine, holding up humanitarian aid that we need around the world for their own political gains around this issue. Let's put the American people first in solutions that they are asking us to provide.
One of the leaders of the House Democrats on the forefront of Democratic politics in the House and nationally, Congresswoman Katherine Clark. We really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.